Remix.
What's up, everybody? My name is Can Scourge. Welcome to the channel. I see lots of people crying internally over how our president, Joe Biden, looked like a lost toddler 2 hours away from his parents, and not enough about the Deutsche Bank speculation on the US market. I'll just be reading the source paper, not any of the opinion pieces on it, and give some perspective, as well as occasional translation. The quote from DB's website about the paper starts off with, Deutsche Bank Research has today published its first client-focused paper under a new banner called What is in the Tails, which examines the potential for higher inflation and the return of boom-bust cycles over the next few years. To comment quickly before we get into it, the boom-bust cycle was never a thing before fiat currency. Fact check me, do your own research on that. It's true, and I despise that it's viewed as an economic law when all you had to do to end it, essentially, to never have another boom-bust cycle, is to back your currency with more than broken promises. But anyway, into the actual paper. Our research team is home to a broad church of views, but we coalesce around the house view for our key macro forecasts. In the interest of intellectual diversity, I have encouraged our research group to leave their comfort zone and carefully consider alternative viewpoints. The new occasional What is in the Tails series is designed to further stimulate debate with our clients by providing reasonable alternatives to the central forecast and scenarios. Now, this establishes a lot more than you think. Deutsche Bank is an investing bank, a very reputable investing bank. They require clients for money and economic and financial data to make more money from that money. This is a PR move on their part. How do I know this? They published this study publicly, and Reuters reported on it. Normally, only clients would receive studies like this from their institutions via email or private communication if they were looking to work with them on future financial plans and strategies. They published this study to flaunt to potential investors that they potentially know what they're talking about. If things go as the paper predicts, this will be what they point investors to say, see, we know what we're doing in this business. Look how we predicted the future. It also wouldn't benefit them to publish this in competitors' faces if it was directed towards their clients and their own interests. Is to essentially stick a claim on, invest in, and bolster their reputation. Also, Reuters doesn't publish anything unless they get an obese paycheck from their corporate sponsors for doing so. Allegedly, of course. The very role of government in the economy is undergoing its biggest shifts in direction in 40 years. In turn, we are concerned that it will bring about uncomfortable levels of inflation. It is no exaggeration to say we are departing from neoliberalism, and that the days of the new liberal policies that begun in the Reagan era are clearly fading in the rearview mirror. The effects of this shift are being compounded by political turmoil in the US and deeply worrying geopolitical risks. As an investor, that's just plain as day. Quote unquote, investor. Investing in physical assets and hedging in the face of massive funny money printing and a planet ready to crack at the seams is a fairly obvious decision right now. It's just my opinion. The rhino in the room has been unleashed and may now prove difficult to stop. That's actually a really clever metaphor, I'm not gonna lie. Deutsche Bank Wealth Management Global CIO Christian Noting said in a research note, adding consumer price inflation in the United States had breached the 7% threshold. Now, I'm aware of what others have said, that if we calculated inflation as we did in the 70s, we'd actually already be in the 15% range. Either way, both numbers are insane. They're very scary. I believe it's possible that inflation may be calculated differently, truly, just so big financial institutions and the average American doesn't completely lose their minds and make decisions that ultimately would save themselves, but absolutely wreck the economy on the macro level. Personally, I think that damage will have to hit either way for us to readjust. But the question now becomes, will it be a recession or a depression? Because the longer we wait for this to hit, the harder it's going to hit. Despite these shifts in priorities, central bankers must still prioritize inflation. Indeed, history has shown that the social cost of significantly high inflation and greatly expanded debt servicing obligations make it hard, if not impossible, to reach the social goals that the new US administration, among others, is keen to achieve. We fear that the vulnerable and disadvantaged will be hit first and hardest by mistakes in policy. I wouldn't blame an economic professional for not understanding the political landscape, because Democrats do not want to uplift the poor and disadvantaged. That's what they say they want. But achieving that would leave them with nothing to run on during elections. So they do the opposite, like taxing businesses at higher rate, therefore passing the financial loss onto the consumer in the form of higher prices or, inflation. History is not on the side of the Fed. In recent memory, the central bank has not succeeded in achieving a soft landing when implementing a monetary tightening when inflation has been above 4%. Policymakers are about to enter a far more difficult world than they have seen for several decades. Well, aside from that last part, you do love to hear the feds and all the guys at the top are going to be having issues. I don't know. That's just my vindictive side. I love to hear it. Info porns, This time around, the amount of stimulus has been an order of magnitude greater. The sum total of legislated stimulus packages so far has totaled well in excess of $5 trillion, or more than 25% of GDP, not counting the infrastructure packages in the pipeline. The US federal deficit is likely to come in at 14 to 15%, over $3 trillion of GDP in both 2020 and 2021, and come to rest in the mid to high single-digit range in the years after. In totality, this is well in excess of the 10% deficit in 2009, $1.8 trillion. The chart below helps visualize the nature of this stimulus. Holy We've spent more on deficit in the past 20 years than World War fucking II. I don't know what I'm feeling right now. It's a whole bunch of emotions and they're all negative. I'm furious. It shows the annual increase in the US federal deficit alongside the increase in the Fed's balance sheet. But as a proportion of GDP, there is a striking difference between today's response and that of prior financial crashes, as today's stimulus dwarfs the response to the crisis in 2008 and the 1930s. We might actually be heading for a Great Depression. This hits pretty hard, so I'm just going to skip to the conclusion. Whatever the reason, we expect inflationary pressures to reemerge as the Fed continues with its policy of patience and its stated belief that current pressures are largely transitory. Okay. It may take a year longer until 2023, but inflation will reemerge. And while it is admirable that this patience is due to the fact that the Fed's priorities are shifting towards social goals, neglecting inflation leaves the global economy sitting on a time bomb. I wish whoever wrote this was in charge of our debt spending, or like anyone else, a 5-year-old, a fucking diaper. Joe Biden's diaper would actually be better at managing the debt, and not spending our money than Congress, than everyone up there. Anyways, eventually, though, any social priorities that policymakers have will be set aside if inflation returns in earnest. Rising prices will touch everyone. The effects could be devastating, particularly for the most vulnerable in society. Sadly, when central banks do act at this stage, they will be forced into abrupt policy change which only make it harder for policymakers to achieve the social goals that our society needs. Low, stable inflation and historically low interest rates have been the glue that have held together macro policy for the last 3 decades. If, as we expect, this starts to unravel over the next year or two, then policymakers will face the most challenging years since the Volcker-Reagan period in the 1980s. You know, I think I've changed my opinion on the study. It might still be an advertising piece. It's more of a public service. You know, this is screaming at heads of state saying, hey, wake up, stupid. You're going to make everyone broke and pissed off. Balance your goddamn checkbook. So my opinion on this paper, well, it hits the nail on the head at every point. Obviously, there's a lot to this paper that I can't insert into the video. That would take forever and get pretty boring. I'll leave a link and a pinned comment on this video to the PDF version of the paper. It states pretty overtly that a global economic crisis is looming following Western government debt spending and money printing due to, let's call it, political desire leading into or following 2023. There's not much that you didn't already know. It's just, you know, this is more of a confirmation bias piece, I think, for most of us on the anything right of Marx, you know. I'll be investing in physical assets and emergency supplies. That's for sure. I can't assume any political biases apart from their obvious financial stake in the global market. They state that the reemergence of inflation's effects is inevitable and that this is in opposition to global leaders' political intentions that Deutsche Bank have also stated they're aware of. You would not go about trying to influence policy decision-making this way. This paper may very well end up in history books when they do studies on the Depression of 2023. And I think that's the point. This is a PR investment and a scream into the void by a very important, powerful, and invested financial institution. Don't get too bummed out. You are now aware and capable of adjusting and preparing before it happens. Please take care, everyone. I was going to make my last sign-off a moniker for the channel, but, you know, it appears money is now even less valuable than the debt it represents. So go out and accumulate wealth, you fucking bum.
Instead of taking bribes and dressing up their wives in mink, the taxes keep on going up, of that there is no doubt. But still they just can't take it in as fast as they dish it out. Our national debt is a monster size and growing every day. Our children's children still unborn are gonna have to pay. Our